Okay, can y'all see that okay? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so like I mentioned, I'm the community organizer with Regeneracion, which is a climate action organization. And when most people think of climate and the environment, they think of melting polar ice caps and saving the rainforest or recycling. But I think of people. I grew up in the Central Valley, where we consistently ranked highest for the most polluted air in the nation because of emissions caused by oil and gas extraction and industrial agriculture. Growing up, my siblings and I all had respiratory issues. So when I think of environmental injustice, I think of my family and my community, and I think of Watsonville, where our predominantly Latinx population are already on the front lines of climate change. So that's what I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about today. So our mission at Regeneracion is to help the community of the Pajaro Valley adapt and flourish as the climate changes. We believe that this is important so that everyone can thrive and live in harmony with the natural world. And our work is distinct in that we approach climate action in an intersectional way, meaning acknowledging the various social injustices that are intertwined with driving the climate crisis. That is to say that nothing or no one exists separate from their identities, and race and class directly influence how people experience climate impacts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate justice and just the roots of it, that climate change is a human rights issue, and it's much more than an environmental issue, which I think kind of has been the past mainstream narrative. And it's a public health emergency, and more people are being killed and displaced and injured, and these impacts are causing food and water shortages worldwide. But I always say that climate crisis is not the problem itself. It's a symptom of a much larger problem, which is the exploitation of people, land, and natural resources. And this exploitation is what has led us to this very devastating moment in time, from wildfires. And we've seen in this past year, the movement to end systemic racial injustices. They're all very deeply related. And in the Pajaro Valley, COVID cases are starting to decline, and we're making progress towards immunity, but we're still continuing to see the lasting repercussions of the pandemic, which are things like extreme economic hardship, the continuation of record-breaking temperatures, and unprecedented wildfires. And all of these are disproportionately affecting farm workers and their families. So Watsonville and the Pajaro Valley is very much a frontline community that's experiencing the firsthand impacts. It's a primarily low-income agricultural town with an 85% Latinx population. And what climate change looks like in the Pajaro Valley is this extreme heat. And so when I talk about how people experience climate impacts based on their identity, when we think of the farm workers who are working outside, they're experiencing, these extreme heat waves while they're outside under like the berry hoops, and under those plastics, it can be up to 10 to 15 degrees higher. So when you think of like an 80-degree day, it can be up to 95 under those plastic hoops. And other things like droughts and storm impacts growing and production. So, if there's like a storm outside and people can't go to work to pick food, they lose out on a day's pay. And there's also wildfires, destructions of homes, and increased pollution in our area. And a little bit more about the social and environmental injustices. Farm workers are at high exposure to pesticides. They're paid by the piece, meaning they're not paid by the hour. So they have to work really hard to fill up their boxes of strawberries. And, they have to overexert themselves just to get, a regular day's pay. Undocumented workers face threats of deportation and little to no workers' rights, because they can be threatened to be deported, and they're not full-time benefited employees. During the pandemic, undocumented immigrants were left out of federal relief, despite contributing billions of dollars in tax revenue. The work is seasonal, so we are in the harvest season now, but Throughout the winter, most farm workers don't have a paycheck. And, you know, there's always that risk of not having work because of decreased demand. Family members were being laid off from non-essential jobs, and there's no guarantee that they got their jobs back once things have started to reopen. And then we're just seeing this worsening financial security. And so that's a little bit about climate impacts in Watsonville. And so Regeneracion was founded in response to seeing how people are affected and how many of like the Santa Cruz County environmental nonprofits really weren't taking a look at how people were being affected and how primarily the communities of color like are being affected. So we were founded in early 2016 through a series of conversations with community leaders, high school students, city council members, and we emerged to address climate change as a social justice issue and show the community the local impacts and engage to build resilience. Some of our initial projects included murals, video research projects, and other forms of community outreach. And so it was founded as a collaborative community effort, and one of those community members was our director, Nancy. She's the second one on the left, and we're still a very small organization. We only have 4 staff members, and we are all less than full-time. However, I think we're able to have a tremendous impact by working with community partners such as CSUMB and with our wonderful pool of dedicated volunteers. So in 2018, our team decided to conduct a community-based research project in order to find out how our local community is being affected by pollution and environmental change, and to learn what solutions people believed would be most beneficial to our community. And so the top concerns that we found, in addition to what y'all see on screen, people found that environmental changes are observed and experienced in the Pajaro Valley, and that these issues affect groups differently and disproportionately, and that there is a strong desire to take personal and collective action. Another key finding is that 74% of agricultural workers, their families or neighbors experience extreme heat conditions at their workplace. This finding led our work to focus on how we can best protect the farm working community from experiencing the extreme impacts of climate change. So we developed brochures outlining how workers can best protect themselves from heat illnesses and made the connection between the increasing amount of heat waves and the changing climate driven by emissions. We shared this information through various mediums, including work with community partners such as local clinics, food banks, and radio stations to get the word out. In August of last year, we hosted a forum focusing on how farm workers can be at the center of solutions for combating climate change. It featured a lineup of all Latinx speakers, including politicians, farm owners, farm workers, doctors, and educators. I had a video, but I don't know if it'll play. That's right. So this is a farm worker. He is one of our staff members' dad, and he was so kind to provide a video of his firsthand experience, you know, in farm work and his experience with climate change. And this is one of the voices that we featured in our forum.
He tenido la dicha de haber trabajado en la rama de la agricultura más de 20 años en el Valle del Pájaro, en la ciudad de Watsonville, en La Mora, en La Fresa. Ahorita estoy trabajando en el cannabis. En los últimos años, toda la rama de la agricultura ha sido afectada por la rama de calor, que es a veces muy insoportable, y los campos están muy resecos por falta de agua. Por mi parte, yo he sido afectado más que nada por la calor, se vienen cosas, no puede resistir. A mí me salía mucha sangre, mucha gente se desmayaba, el agua no es suficiente para calmar la calor, hay que recibir atención médica. trabajaba en la mora, adentro en los túneles bajo del plástico. Todo el tiempo es 10, 12 grados más caliente que lo normal. Más o menos del 2000 al 2005, o sea, hubo mucho daño por el sol, por la calor, el sobrecalentamiento. Mucha fruta no se logró, se echó a perder. Mi ingreso fue afectado en la forma de que hace mucha calor, la fruta se echa a perder, el producto, te cambian los horarios, muchas veces en pleno mediodía te sacan de trabajar para que te haga daño. Quisiera decirle a la comunidad, a la gente, que tengan conciencia de los que trabajamos en el campo, porque por nosotros llevamos frutas, verduras a la mesa y necesitamos tener mejores sueldos, mejores compañías de seguro. Llevamos mucha friega en el campo y somos los menos pagados. Para vivir con dignidad, un trabajador agrícola necesita mejores sueldos, mejores aseguranzas médicas, que no nomás cubra a la pareja, ya sea la esposa o el esposo, que cubra a los hijos y un poco más de respeto hacia las personas. Ok, para cerrar esta entrevista, solo quiero decirle a la gente que tenga conciencia, que lean, miren videos sobre el calentamiento global. Existe y nos está dañando a nosotros como personas. Solo les digo, piensen en sus hijos, en sus nietos, piensen en el futuro de ellos. No hagan cosas que esté dañando el planeta, porque en realidad todo nos está dañando. Gracias.
Yeah, so I think this is like really key to our work, is that, you know, we want to feature the voices of people actually affected, and it's not just, you know, myself or our exec thinking about what solutions are. So really just framing this as solutions coming from people.
Hola, mi nombre es Juan y he tenido la vida.
How do we go next? There we go. Okay. Okay. So during this forum, we strategized on what solutions would look like in our area. We collaborated with educators, farm workers, growers, and health professionals. There is no silver bullet when it comes to climate action, and that's why we take a place-based approach and plan with our community on what they want healthy and sustainable communities to look like. We involve people on the ground as well as local and state legislators, because individual action or policy alone won't work. We need to combine all of these efforts and get every sector and person involved. Another huge way to participate in climate action is by engaging in local government. So during election season, we held a local city council candidate forum focusing on climate and equity. We wanted to ensure that our local politicians are thinking about how residents are being impacted and how we can include equity in all of our decision making. Another big goal or another big part of our work is to educate people more about what they can do and more about the background of climate change and the effects on residents and actions that people can take to participate in a just transition off of fossil fuels. So we have handouts like these, some that focus on eating a more plant-rich diet, and all of our handouts are in English and Spanish. And pre-COVID, you know, we did a lot of things like tabling, but now we find like new and creative ways to get our handouts out through things like the Farm Worker Caravan, where people go around and give thanks to farm workers and resources. So we share our handouts there and things like care packages for farm workers. I do shifts at the food bank, so that way I can talk to people firsthand and share our resources. So this is our heat stress resource. So as you can see, it makes the connection to climate change. It talks about personal responsibility, but also linking it to government action by talking to your politicians. And then there are also local resources on there for things like free healthcare for farm workers, not healthcare, but like a clinic for farm workers. And then other organizations in Watsonville that really emphasize helping, our Spanish speaking community to do things like, fill out forms for like rental assistance and things like that. And as you can see here, this is kind of the instruction on how to stay best protected. And I will point out that they are in English and Spanish, but we really try and keep them more image oriented because not all of our population can read. And then there's also a large population in Watsonville from indigenous areas in Mexico, like Oaxaca. So a lot of our residents speak Mixteco and other indigenous languages. And so we also work with other people in the Mixteco speaking community to help us pass out these resources and kind of be able to explain them. Last year, or earlier this year, we held another forum, this time focusing on women, girls, and climate justice. And we featured Indigenous voices from our area. So we were able to feature the voices of, some of those people that I was mentioning. And so it was really cool. The forum was translated into Mixteco as well as Spanish, and it highlighted women's leadership, as women are another group that are disproportionately affected by climate impacts. And here are some of the amazing women that spoke. We had people in agriculture, engineering, really focusing on, how women are often left out of the conversation when really we have all these like really great and innovative solutions. And so not only do we increase awareness about climate change and social justice, but we also create pathways for leadership. We do this with like working with CSUMB service learners, and once a month we hold a young environmental justice activist support group. So it's really just a chance for everyone to like air all their grievances and like share all the different projects that they've been working on, just so that we really have like more of a sense of community and we avoid burnout, because climate change is kind of a heavy subject. About a year ago, myself and a group of volunteers started our Advocacy Committee, really thinking about how we can best advocate for climate justice. And this is really cool because, it's like not tied to any like one project or grant. We all come up with like what we want to work on ourselves. So we focused a lot on city council, speaking on, whatever comes up on the city council agenda. We've worked a lot to influence city budget, and for things that like, don't seem climate related, like affordable housing and things like that. So just yesterday, we held a webinar on alternatives for policing. About over 40% of Watsonville's general fund goes to policing. Meanwhile, departments like Public Works, Parks and Community Services, and Community Development are all at 10% or below of the general fund. And so we really want to think about how our city is spending our money. And so, with over half of our taxes going to the general fund, that's money that's not funding climate adaptation or mitigation or the real root causes of our societal issues. And so this was we really wanted to provide like alternatives for how we can begin to reallocate funds that really help the community and address like the root issues of problems. So this is some more of our advocacy work. We work a lot on social media, like rallying people to speak at these city council meetings. And I think it's been really effective. I've mainly been an organizer just in the time of the pandemic, but when I first started going to city council meetings, there would only be like 1 or 2 people speaking, and now there's like 15. Yeah, and sometimes they can go on for like 6 hours, but it's really inspiring to like see people take action. So we do things like farm worker protections for like better pay or like personal protection, PPE, as well as like opposing fossil fuel infrastructure and things like that. This summer, we're working on a clean mobility survey to ask people what their preference is for clean shared mobility options. We have a big eevee project going on right now, helping people get access to grants and rebates, because that can be like a really complicated process. And I think that is also like a really good example of a place-based response. Transportation emissions in Santa Cruz County are actually like way higher than the state, closer to 60% of our total emissions. So electrifying transportation is a really key part in meeting our climate goals. I will say that every single person buying a brand new EV is not a sustainable response, but to meet our climate goals, we do hope that people will consider them. And then there's the justice aspect of transportation. Black and brown communities like Watsonville breathe in disproportionate amounts of air pollution. And yeah, like EVs can actually be a really affordable option and the least polluting cars. So that's what we've heard from some people, is that like the cut in emissions to like have healthier air for their kids and their neighbors is one of the biggest incentives for them switching over. Yeah, so kind of brings me to the end. When we talk about community responsibility, yeah, we are emphasizing, thinking about the roots of climate change, and so we need to end like racist policies and all of exploitation of people, and yeah, so we can do those things with some of these things listed here, but I think like, ending oppression and really integrating equity is like a lifelong commitment, and you have to like think about it in every single thing that you do. So yeah, I like kind of want to open up the conversation from here, and just hope that we can like talk more about like what climate action looks like beyond things like recycling and riding your bike. And just thinking about who we are, and what our identities are, and how we can be part of this movement. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Natalie. That was really cool to see like all the different parts of your organization and the different ways that you're impacting the community. Mm-hmm. We are a small enough group, gang. So did you want to do a breakout, or you want to have a whole group conversation, or how do you want to proceed from here, Natalie?
Maybe we could do breakout rooms and then come back and kind of share what we talked about.
Super.
Awesome. We made it.
Sweet. Well, I hope y'all had some good conversations. I see that we're like right around that 10-minute mark. So we could do the Q&A, or we could share. I don't know if there's a preference.
Can anyone talk about any major threads that were in your conversation? Anything stand out that you were talking about?
I kind of liked how we talked about having a platform and the PG Museum kind of stepping in for that as that platform, and how maybe like a little bit of racial justice, like, or exposing inequalities that happen in the community is something that the PG Museum kind of hasn't really done before. So, and I guess since it's known as a natural history museum, a lot of people think it's just about the animals and the environment, but the natural history is also the history of the people, and that continues to the history is still continuing today. So I guess
that was so well said. That's something that I really like about hardcore natural history, is that it's history now, and history how it's affecting the present and what we can do for the future. So history, I think like this kind of changes the idea of that, is that it's not, like things that were 50 years ago. It's absolutely like what's happening today, how we're making history, and Natalie is even facilitating that conversation. What can we do now? And I'm so glad that we are able, as the Natural History Museum, to be that platform to elevate those voices and to have those difficult conversations. So thank you, for mentioning that. I think that was a really good point, and that's what I loved about our breakout session as well.
Yeah, I can share from our group. We talked a lot about, the idea of finding community partners that are already really connected to these communities. That, like, I personally, as a white lady, I'm not the best advocate for a lot of other communities, right? I'm a good advocate for mine, but that's it. And so finding those voices and finding those partners who are already either community leaders or have an active relationship, and try to find ways to use our platform to elevate that, or to bring them in, or to partner with them, rather than trying to like invent things from scratch without the actual knowledge of that community. And I think that's been kind of the biggest shift that I've seen over the last couple of years, is from every organization saying, we're going to create, like, we want to include more people, and we're going to create a program to do that, regardless of, whether we're in that community or not. And shifting to, okay, we need to like find these resources where they are and just elevate them, and pull them up to the same, like voice level, so that, rather than trying to invent things.
I think that that's one of the most powerful parts of the work that you're doing, Natalie, that the degree to which you like are seeking out voices of people who are affected by climate change, and using their voices to bring awareness to the topic. And I agree that that's a role that the museum should have as well. Can you talk about that process? How do you find those voices, and then how do you encourage those people to be willing to share their stories? Because I think that's really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, it's been incredibly difficult in this past year, especially like, everything being online, and, the majority of our population like not having, strong, steady internet connection. So yeah, it's all of, I think like our strategy is always meet people where they're at. So that's why we've done things like, volunteering at the food bank, and, going out to the fields and reaching out to like growers to be able to connect with people there. And so I think that like people know that these things are happening to them, but the connection's not always there. So kind of just talking to them about like what their experience is, and then relating it back. So really starting out with that connection. And so we can continue, like the farmers market is a big one in Watsonville. We just got a new one, so I'm excited to start that one. But yeah, it's like a really central meeting place in Watsonville. So we do a lot of tabling there. And yeah, like people are always really excited. Like people are super friendly in Watsonville, and they're always excited to talk to us. So you just ask them about themselves and start to build those relationships there.
That's cool. Other folks want to throw in questions? Is it all right, Natalie, if we ask questions about your work now?
Yeah.
Anyone else want to throw in questions about the work with Regeneracion?
I'll throw out a general question. What's your favorite part about the work that you do? I know it's probably difficult because it sounds like you do some amazing work, but what's your favorite aspect?
I would say like for sure my favorite is working with the volunteers, and like that team that we lead. Like it's so cool that we like get to come up with our own projects, and then like within, and it's, I don't know, it's just like so cool to me that like people are just like willing to spend their time with me and like do really important work, and like just like how dedicated the volunteers are. Like that whole webinar that we threw yesterday, like we put it out in like 2 weeks and we had over 100 people registered, and like city council members, and yeah, so just seeing like the impact of like working with these really amazing people and like, yeah, having that direct impact is just like what keeps me going every day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Natalie, it seems as though, I mean, I understand like the focus on the community, and does that mean that you're so focused on community issues and your local community, or do you also look at what's going on a statewide level, national, international? Do you become a part of that conversation also, or do you just really try to focus specifically on your local community?
We do try and do a bit of both. We are limited in like what we can do as a 501c3 nonprofit. But yeah, like some of the farm worker protections, that was on a state level. Yeah, and just kind of like things that are not too political. Like we did census work because, you know, the more people who participate in the census, the more funding that we can get for our communities. So we think bigger in that way. But yeah, when it comes to like advocating for certain bills and stuff, we're limited as like what we can say as an organization. But we do some of it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question along those lines. Speaking from my organization, you know, we're a state agency, and so we have a huge limitation put on like when we are sharing climate change issues or social justice issues, there's this larger like, you know, the state's very restrictive because we're government employees, we're paid out of taxpayer funds. And so we have to feel completely unbiased. And I think it's been weird in this kind of transitional period of history where we're starting to make this leap towards understanding that some things are not, it's not that it's bias, it's that this is what should and shouldn't be tolerated in a community. Mm-hmm. And as we're making that, you know, we've had things where we've had to like send documents up the line to try to figure out, you know, is this like considered, you know, government bias if we say it as state agents. You know, I've had occasional events where like I just wear a different uniform so that I feel less like I'm speaking from that position. So if you all have, you know, similar restrictions because of your being a 501c3, what are some ways that you have found ways to share messaging on things related to bills or things related to law and voting mm-hmm. in ways that don't, I guess, sound biased or don't make you political in a way that you would get in trouble with your grants or seem like a specific voice? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like the outline of like what is and what isn't political, like, you know, they spell it out and it seems very clear. But I've like talked to like lawyers on it and they were like, oh, everything really just depends. Like even with city council, they were like, oh yeah, like you can speak against this fossil fuel infrastructure and it's probably not political, but someone could make the argument that it is. Yeah. So I think it's like, I don't know, I think we're kind of just like, we're on the edgier side maybe. And maybe because we're not like, you know, a state agency, like I think the worst thing that could happen to us is like someone will say like, hey, you can't say that or something. But yeah, in terms of things like lobbying for certain bills, like we can do that. We just have to make it a smaller fraction of what we do and track all the hours. But I think it's helpful that like it's paid hours. So our volunteers can work on it as much as they want. But it's just like me and the exec who like can't put in like, you know, all of our things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Chris and Swaroop had a comment question.
Thank you, Natalie, for all of your fabulous work. It's really exciting to hear about it today. And I'm just curious when you mentioned going to the places that the people are, like when you go to the growers, wondering how much resistance you find there or how it works best to navigate those waters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the grower outreach was kind of a tricky one. For like large growers, I would just send kind of cold emails and I got very little responses. But we do have connections with like smaller growers, which is kind of funny. Like they are still experiencing those climate impacts, but you know, they all often like have a closer relationship with the owner of the farm, and they're often like, you know, treated much better. And so we do want to reach them, but like a lot of those large growers that, you know, are experiencing more of those like harsh impacts is a lot trickier. So I think that one's not maybe our best medium of communication, but I know that like the Campesino Caravan, who I mentioned earlier, would go to farm. They started to have some of those connections, so we would go through them. And then I think like the better way is like going to like where farm workers get their resources. So like the Center for Farm Worker Families and the Community Action Board.
Great, thank you.
We have like 1 more minute if anyone else has a few more questions for Natalie. It's been super helpful hearing all the questions and perspectives.
I'll also share our website.
I can.
Email.
Okay, that's fine.
There we go. She put her the website of Regeneracion in the chat. And then did somebody have a question real quick? I don't know who that was that spoke up. Okay. All right. Well, if no one has any last minute questions, I want to thank you all for being here. And I am super excited. Oh, let's see. Swarp and Chris, you're clapping. Are you waving? You're clapping. They're clapping. Thank you, Natalie. I want to thank you so much for speaking with all of us and sharing the work that you do and the passion that you have for it. And I'm really excited to tell everybody that our next talk will be in person at the museum. So that is really nice. So we will be, yes, both online and in person. So you can do it either way. I know on a work night, sometimes it's tough to get all the way out to the museum. So we're going to go both directions. And Julia is going to also let you know some other things that are going on.
Yes, so I'll go ahead and I'll throw that link in the chat for next month's Hardcore Natural History, which is on Thursday, June 24th, same time, 6 o'clock. Like Lisa said, it's going to be hybrid, so partially in person in the museum and then also virtually as well. It'll be with Monterey One Water, and the conversation will focus on wastewater and how it's become an important resource for the community. We also have our fundraiser coming up. So our annual Night Owl fundraiser is finally back, and that will be on June 12th. So if anyone can join us, we're gonna have movie night. So we're doing a drive-in movie where we're gonna play Night at the Museum. So that'll be going on. And if you're interested in checking out all the rest of our upcoming events, we have some really cool videos that we're still launching. We're doing Science Saturdays once a month as well, and summer camps are coming up too. So I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. And I also just want to say thank you so much, Natalie, for coming on to the call. That was such a fascinating talk, and I love the breakout rooms as well. So I appreciate you facilitating that. And thank you everyone as well for supporting the museum and for being here tonight. And I hope you can join us for other upcoming events as well. I'll be sending the recording for this once it's ready to your emails as well.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you all for having me.
Everyone.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you, Natalie.
Bye,
Thanks,
y'all.
Natalie. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.